Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever caught yourself staring at the phone, waiting for a message that never comes, wondering why someone lives rent-free in your mind without even trying? It's not just obsession, and it's not weakness, it's a signal, a spark, a call to action. Because when someone takes up that much space in your thoughts without any real effort to stay, it means something in you is trying to wake up. Maybe it's your fear of being invisible, your hunger for validation, or your deep-rooted desire to be seen without having to shout. Whatever it is, it's urgent and it's real. But wait before you assume this is just another heartache pep talk. Ask yourself, what if that constant thought isn't about them at all? What if it's the clearest clue to what you're really missing in your own journey? Trust me, once you see what's really behind that silence, you'll never waste another second begging for breadcrumbs again. When someone is constantly on your mind, especially in the absence of regular communication, it's not just about them, it's often about what their absence reveals within you. This kind of persistent mental focus is rarely random. It's a psychological spotlight, shining directly onto the parts of your emotional landscape that are yearning for something more. Think of it as your inner voice waving a red flag, drawing attention to needs you might have buried or ignored for years. The feeling is subtle, at first a glance at your phone, a memory triggered by a song, the sudden urge to scroll through old messages. But behind every moment like that is a deeper question. What am I actually missing right now? Unmet emotional needs are not flaws. They're fundamental human truths. Every one of us needs to feel seen, valued, heard, and loved. These needs begin forming in childhood and evolve as we grow. When they're not met, when you feel invisible in your relationships, when your voice feels like an echo in a canyon, you don't just move on. Your brain, your heart, your body, they all remember. And they find ways to bring that memory back to the surface, often disguised as longing for someone else's presence. It's not about the person. It's about what they represent: attention, safety, validation, excitement, connection. Let's say someone you once felt close to suddenly stops communicating. At first, your mind tries to stay logical. They must be busy. Maybe they're going through something. But as time goes on, your thoughts don't slow down, they multiply. And suddenly, you're not just thinking about them, you're questioning yourself. Did I say something wrong? Am I not good enough? Why do I care so much? That spiral isn't just heartbreak. That's emotional deprivation speaking. That's years of not being fully chosen, fully prioritized, fully understood. It's not about missing them. It's about missing the feeling you believe they could give you. What's fascinating and often painful is that many people don't realize they're chasing an emotional ghost. The person on your mind may not have even offered the thing you believe you're craving. Maybe they were inconsistent, half-present, or emotionally unavailable. But your attachment to the idea of them, to the potential of what could have been, is what keeps the emotional loop alive. Your unmet need isn't always obvious. It may not scream, "I need to feel loved." It whispers through obsessive thoughts, through repeated patterns, through your inability to focus on anything else. It shows up when you check your phone 100 times a day, not just for their message, but for any sign that you matter to someone. This need can also stem from unresolved trauma, times when your feelings were dismissed or your voice silenced. If you grew up being told you were too sensitive or you had to work hard to earn someone's attention, you likely learned that love is conditional. That belief gets deeply wired into your nervous system. So when someone pulls away, your brain doesn't just see it as distance, it sees it as danger. Your survival instincts kick in. You chase, you ruminate, you blame yourself. But all of that is your mind trying to get back to a feeling of emotional safety. Ironically, the person who's triggering this cycle may not even be doing anything at all. They might be distant, indifferent, or even completely out of the picture, but their role in your story becomes symbolic. They become the placeholder for your deeper needs, the ones you're often afraid to confront directly. That's the power of projection. Your mind takes what it's missing and paints it onto someone else, hoping that they'll notice, that they'll care, that they'll stay. But even if they do, it's never enough, because the real need isn't being addressed. The real healing doesn't come from them texting back. It comes from finally acknowledging the emotional wound you've carried and daring to ask yourself what you truly need to feel whole. This reflection doesn't come easily. Most people don't want to admit they feel emotionally unfulfilled. There's a fear that naming it will make it worse, that saying, I feel unseen or I feel unwanted will confirm your worst fears. But the opposite is true. The moment you identify the real need beneath the obsession, you take the first step toward emotional clarity. You move from chasing to choosing. You stop asking, why won't they message me? And start asking, why am I waiting for someone to fill what I haven't given myself? This is the uncomfortable beauty of emotional growth. It demands honesty, it invites discomfort, and it forces you to hold up a mirror not just to the people who hurt you, but to the patterns you've accepted in yourself. You start to realize that every unanswered message, every ignored call, every quiet space in the relationship is actually an invitation not to chase harder, but to come home to yourself. When someone holds space in your mind without effort and their attention feels like oxygen, it's often a sign that you've unknowingly placed your sense of worth into their hands. It's subtle at first how a single message from them can light up your day, or how their silence can make everything feel heavier. You tell yourself it's normal, that it's just connection, attraction, or interest. But underneath that, something deeper is operating. When their approval makes you feel valuable and their absence makes you question your importance, it means your self-worth is no longer rooted in you. It's become tied to their reactions, their consistency, their availability, and sometimes even their indifference. Projecting your self-worth onto someone else doesn't look like a dramatic plea for attention. It often shows up as quiet overthinking, emotional dependency masked as love, or constant self-doubt when you don't receive the response you were hoping for. You start to second-guess your messages, reread conversations for clues, and replay past interactions, trying to decode what went wrong. You're not doing this because you're needy. You're doing it because, somewhere along the way, you started to believe that your value could be measured by how someone else perceives you. Their attention becomes your evidence that you matter. This cycle usually has roots in earlier experiences, moments when love was inconsistent, conditional, or had to be earned. Maybe you grew up feeling like your emotions were too much or that your presence wasn't enough. So you adapted. You learned to scan for signs, to read people's energy, to become hyper-aware of how others respond to you. And without realizing it, you built a belief that being worthy means being chosen, that being important means being validated by someone else's interest, that if someone pulls away, it must mean you're lacking something. This belief system can shape your entire way of relating. You might find yourself overextending, trying too hard, becoming who you think they want instead of who you truly are. You sacrifice your boundaries just to stay close. You ignore red flags because losing their attention feels like losing a part of yourself. And when the attention comes, you feel alive. But when it fades, you feel hollow. That emotional roller coaster isn't just painful, it's exhausting. Because deep down, you're chasing not just their presence, but your own lost sense of value. The truth is, no one can give you the kind of validation that replaces your own. Their praise might feel good for a moment. Their compliments might soothe the ache temporarily. But unless you rebuild that sense of worth from within, you'll always be dependent on someone else to remind you that you're enough. And that dependency creates a power imbalance. It makes their attention feel like a lifeline rather than a choice. It traps you in a mindset where silence feels like punishment and affection feels like reward. This mindset also causes you to ignore your own needs. You become so focused on whether they're responding, engaging, or showing up that you forget to check if you are showing up for yourself. Are you speaking your truth or just saying what you think they want to hear? Are you honoring your emotions or stuffing them down to appear cool and unbothered? Are you choosing them out of genuine connection or because you're afraid of what their absence might say about you? The hardest part about untangling your worth from someone else's attention is confronting the fear that you're not enough on your own, that if they walk away, you'll be left with nothing. But that fear is a lie. You've always been enough. Their silence doesn't shrink you. Their approval doesn't enlarge you. You were whole long before they noticed you, and you'll still be whole long after they forget you. What's missing isn't more of their attention, it's your own recognition of your inherent value. This kind of awakening doesn't happen overnight. It comes slowly, often through discomfort, through moments where you resist the urge to beg for their notice, through days where you sit with your own pain instead of trying to fix it by reaching out, through rebuilding the parts of you that learned love only comes when you prove you're worthy of it. You begin to understand that someone's inconsistency doesn't define your desirability. That being overlooked doesn't mean you're invisible. That being ghosted doesn't make you unlovable. The real power comes when you realize that you don't need someone else's gaze to feel seen, that your value doesn't fluctuate with someone's mood, that the attention you crave from others is the same attention you must start giving to yourself patiently, consistently, unconditionally. Not because it's easy, but because your peace depends on it. Not because you don't care about connection, but because you no longer want to abandon yourself in the name of being chosen by someone else. When someone goes silent and your heart races, your stomach turns, and your mind spirals into endless scenarios, it's not just about the silence itself. It's about what that silence represents to you. For many, that absence of communication acts like a trigger reaching deep into your nervous system and activating a fear that was planted long ago. The fear of being abandoned, forgotten, or rejected. This fear doesn't always make itself known in loud, obvious ways. It often slips in quietly, disguised as overthinking, self-blame, anxiety, or the urge to fix something that you don't even fully understand. It tells you, you must have done something wrong, they don't care about you, you're too much, or you're not enough. And those thoughts don't just hurt, they unravel your sense of security. The human brain is wired for connection, and from childhood, we learn what safety looks like through the consistency of those closest to us. When that consistency is missing, when love is unpredictable, when affection is given and taken away without reason, you don't just grow up confused. You grow up equating silence with danger. So, later in life, when someone you care about stops responding, your body reacts as if it's under threat. You might feel sick, restless, agitated. Your thoughts might obsess over their last words, trying to dissect meaning, predict outcomes, or preempt rejection before it becomes real. But what's really happening underneath all that mental noise is a survival response. Your mind is trying to make sense of emotional uncertainty because emotional unpredictability once felt like chaos. This fear of abandonment isn't about weakness. It's about memory, emotional memory that's stored not just in your mind, but in your body. It's the echo of every time someone left without explanation, every time your needs were minimized, every time you were made to feel like too much or not enough. These memories condition you to see silence not as a neutral space, but as a void filled with threat. And so, when it happens again, even in adulthood, you revert to that younger version of yourself who just wants reassurance, clarity, and the simple comfort of being told, "I'm here, you matter." But because silence doesn't offer those things, you begin to fill in the blanks yourself. You imagine the worst-case scenarios. You believe you've been rejected before it's even confirmed. And often you react not to what's actually happening, but to the story your fear is writing in your head. You might reach out again and again, not out of calm desire, but out of desperate need to relieve the tension. You may feel embarrassed for caring so much, yet unable to stop yourself from checking your phone every few minutes. You're not needy, you're trying to feel safe in a situation that feels emotionally unsafe. What makes this cycle so painful is that it reinforces itself. The more someone withdraws, the more anxious you become. The more anxious you feel, the more your actions shift from self-trust to self-doubt. You start to chase even when it hurts. You try to prove your worth even when it's not required. And all the while, you're abandoning your own emotional center in an attempt to hold onto someone else's. That's the true wound, not their silence, but the way it pulls you away from yourself. Rejection is one of the most primal fears we experience, and when silence enters a connection, it can feel like rejection in slow motion. It's the in-between space where nothing is confirmed, but everything is suspected. You might begin to question your value, your attractiveness, your lovability. You may even try to rationalize their behavior, hoping to make sense of the emotional distance. But deep down, your fear isn't just that they're ignoring you, it's that you weren't enough to stay connected to in the first place. And that fear can eat away at your confidence, making you feel small in relationships that should feel expansive. Learning to navigate this fear isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming anchored. It requires you to separate their silence from your story about what that silence means. It challenges you to sit in uncertainty without rushing to rescue yourself through overcommunication or self-sacrifice. It's about asking, what is this really triggering in me, rather than, how do I make them come back? Because when you begin to understand your fear, you gain power over it. And from that power, you can start making choices that come from self-respect rather than emotional panic. The truth is, silence will happen. People will withdraw, go quiet, or take space for their own reasons. But that doesn't have to define your worth or determine your reaction. When you recognize that your fear of abandonment is just a signal and invitation to look inward, you begin to reclaim control. Not over them, but over your own emotional state. You stop needing to chase answers and start learning to give yourself the grounding you once looked for in someone else. When someone lingers in your thoughts and every silence from them feels louder than any words, it's easy to assume the solution lies in reaching outward through messages, calls, or obsessive overanalysis. But in truth, that persistent mental loop, that emotional ache, is a signal not to chase them, but to come home to yourself. It's a sign to turn inward, not as a last resort, but as the most powerful first step. Because when your peace, identity, and sense of value hinge on someone else's attention, you've unknowingly given them a kind of control they were never meant to hold. That control isn't just about communication, it's about your personal power, and reclaiming that begins the moment you stop waiting for them to validate your worth and start remembering that you had it all along. Turning inward isn't about isolation or detachment. It's about realignment. It's choosing to focus on what you can influence: your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, instead of spiraling over what you can't. When you feel consumed by someone's absence, you're often not just missing them, you're missing you. The version of yourself that felt full, grounded, and alive before they came into the picture. The version that knew who they were without needing someone else's presence to reflect it back. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about caring more deeply about yourself than the approval or affection of someone who can't or won't consistently show up. The process of reclaiming your power begins with awareness. You have to notice when you're outsourcing your happiness, when your mood is tied to their actions, when your energy is being drained in silent expectation. Awareness isn't always comfortable. It means sitting with uncomfortable truths, that sometimes you gave too much of yourself hoping they'd stay, or that you lowered your boundaries to feel closer, only to feel more alone. But that discomfort is necessary. It's the crack where the light gets in. You can't change what you refuse to see. And once you see it, you can begin to choose differently. Personal power is not about becoming hard, cold, or distant. It's about becoming whole. It's choosing to be so connected to your own worth that someone else's distance doesn't feel like a personal attack. It's the ability to sit in the silence and still feel secure, not because you don't care, but because you've built a strong enough relationship with yourself that you no longer fear the quiet. This strength isn't born overnight. It's built moment by moment in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is speaking to you, in the way you soothe your own anxiety instead of begging someone else to do it for you, in the way you stay rooted when your emotions try to pull you out of alignment. Every time you choose to turn inward instead of chasing outward, you are reclaiming your autonomy. You're saying, I don't need to perform to be loved. I don't need to prove my worth. I don't need to beg for something that should be freely given. That choice, repeated over time, rewires how you see yourself. It replaces desperation with dignity. It turns longing into clarity, and eventually the person you couldn't stop thinking about becomes a mirror not of who they are, but of what you were missing in yourself. You begin to see that what you wanted from them, affection, attention, consistency, are things you can begin to cultivate within your own life. Through your own habits, through the people you surround yourself with, through the boundaries you set and honor. There's a shift that happens when you stop asking, "Why won't they come closer?" and start asking, "Why do I keep stepping away from myself?" That question changes everything. It shifts your focus from lack to abundance, from fear to freedom. Because the more you return to yourself, the less you tolerate anything that feels like abandonment in disguise. You stop being impressed by inconsistent affection. You stop waiting for closure from people who never gave you clarity. You stop settling for connections that cost you your peace. This isn't about becoming self-sufficient to the point of rejecting intimacy. It's about creating a foundation so strong that love becomes a beautiful addition, not a desperate need. You no longer need to be chosen to feel valuable. You no longer need to be seen to believe in your worth. You see yourself clearly, and in that clarity you find peace. Not because everything outside has changed, but because everything within has come back into alignment. That is your power, not loud, not flashy, but steady, unwavering, and deeply yours.